The rain in London has a particular smell. It's not clean, not like the rain in the countryside. It's the scent of wet concrete and old soot, of diesel fumes washing off the black cabs and seeping into the drains. It's the smell of a city that's seen too much, a city that keeps its secrets buried deep beneath the pavement. And on the night of September 11th, 1971, that rain was falling steadily over Marylebone, painting the cobblestones of Baker Street a slick, oily black. If you'd been walking down that street, past the familiar silhouette of 2 Untriset to 1B, you'd have noticed nothing out of the ordinary. The city was sleeping, or trying to. The occasional late-night bus would hiss by, its interior a lonely lit capsule in the dark, but you wouldn't have looked twice at the small, unassuming building at 8890 Baker Street, the London and Provincial Bank. Its facade was just another in a long row, its windows dark, its vault, or so everyone believed, securely locked away. You wouldn't have known that beneath your feet in the cold, damp earth, a story of breathtaking audacity was unfolding. A story that would baffle Scotland Yard, captivate the public, and then just as suddenly vanish into the city's foggy lore. My name is irrelevant. Think of me as a guide, a voice from the shadows, someone who has pieced this puzzle together over long, sleepless nights. I've read the reports, the heavily redacted files, the wild speculations in the press. I've walked the same streets, felt the same chill in the air, and I'm going to tell you how it happened. Not the sanitized version, not the official line, but the real story, the one that lives in the spaces between the facts, in the cold sweat on a man's brow, in the silent, terrifying moment before a lock gives way. It didn't start that night. It started weeks, months before, in a rented room not far from here with a man we'll call Anthony, a professional, a craftsman, but not in any conventional sense. His workshop was the underbelly of the city, and his tools were crowbars, thermal lances, and a particular ruthless kind of patience. He was the planner, the architect. He'd had his eye on the Baker Street Bank for over a year, not for its cash holdings, which were modest, but for what lay inside its individual safe deposit boxes, the secret treasures of the wealthy and the crooked. Cash, jewels, bonds, secrets, a fortune in portable, untraceable assets. Anthony had assembled a crew, each one a specialist, each one a ghost. There was the lookout, a man with the patience of a stone and eyes that missed nothing. The driver, who could thread a van through London's labyrinthine back streets, as if he had a map of them etched on the back of his eyelids. And then there were the tunnelers, men who knew the feel of clay and London brick, who could read the groan of the earth and the shift of a foundation. They were the heart of the operation, its muscle and its nerve. The plan was as simple as it was insane. They wouldn't go through the door. They wouldn't confront the alarms on the windows. They would go under it. They would tunnel. Their base of operations was a leather goods shop 2 doors down, leased under a false name. For weeks they'd been going in at night, a few at a time, carrying in what looked like supply, but hidden amongst the rolls of leather and tools were sacks for dirt, timber for shoring, and the tools of their dark trade. Inside the shop's back room, they moved a heavy cabinet, revealing a trap door cut neatly into the floorboards. Beneath that was the bare earth, the very foundation of London. I still wonder what that first night was like, swinging a pick into that cold, compacted soil. The sound would have been muffled, of course, by blankets and insulation they'd hung on the walls, but in the silence of the night, it must have felt deafening. Each shovelful of earth was a risk, a potential signature of their crime. They couldn't just dump it. No, that was another masterpiece of logistics. The earth was carefully bagged, smuggled out in the same vans that brought them in, and disposed of in remote locations, scattered like ashes. They were ghosts, digging a grave for the bank's security. The tunnel itself was a thing of grim, claustrophobic beauty. It was only about 2 feet wide and 3 feet high. A man couldn't walk through it. He had to crawl, dragging his tools and his courage behind him. They'd shored it up with timber, but the air was thick with the smell of damp earth and rotting history. The weight of the city was above them, the press of century. Every creak from the street above, every rumble of a distant train would have been magnified, a constant reminder of the precariousness of their endeavor. They were moles, burrowing towards an impossible prize. For weeks, this was their life. The slow, agonizing progress inch by inch, foot by foot. Their world shrank to the circle of light from their headlamps, the scrape of the trowel, the ache in their muscle. They were navigating by compass, and by Anthony's meticulous calculations, aiming for a point directly beneath the bank's vault. A single misjudgment, a few degrees off, and they'd end up in a sewer, or under the street, or lost forever in a maze of forgotten foundation. And then, one night, the character of the work changed. The soft earth gave way to something harder, more unyielding, concrete. The foundation of the bank. This was the moment of truth. This was where the burglary truly began. The picks and shovels were set aside. Now came the more delicate, more dangerous tools, jackhammers, their noise a terrifying, percussive roar that they had to mask with the sound of a recorded radio playing at high volume inside the shop. They worked in short, frantic bursts, hearts hammering in time with the tool, praying the sound wouldn't travel, that a late-night passerby wouldn't wonder about the strange construction work happening after hours. It took them 3 nights to breach the foundation, 3 nights of nerve-shredding tension. When they finally broke through, the air that sighed out from the cavity below the bank was cold and stale, tasting of dust and money. They had reached the subfloor, the underbelly of the vault. Now listen closely. This is where the genius, the sheer chilling audacity of the plan becomes clear. The floor of the bank's vault was reinforced concrete, nearly 2 feet thick, laced with steel rebar and a web of pressure-sensitive alarm. To touch it, to even drill into it, would have brought the entire Metropolitan Police down upon them. But Anthony had known this. He'd done his homework. The vault floor wasn't sitting directly on the earth. There was a gap, a crawl space of about a foot, between the underside of the reinforced vault floor and the top of the bank's foundation. A space just large enough for a man to worm his way through. They hadn't needed to break into the vault. They only needed to break into the space beneath it. They enlarged the hole in the foundation, just enough for a man to squeeze through. And then, Anthony, being the leader, went first. I tried to imagine him wriggling on his back in that pitch-black, dust-choked cavity. The underside of the vault floor was just inches from his face. He could feel the cold of the concrete through his clothes. With a slow, deliberate movement, he would have taken a drill from his belt, not to drill into the concrete above him. That would be suicide. But to drill a small, exploratory hole into the wooden floor of the vault itself, which was built on top of the concrete slab, a tiny peephole, an eye into the kingdom. He would have put his eye to that hole, and what he saw was the interior of the vault, rows and rows of safe deposit boxes, like a wall of metal tombs. He was in. The next part was both brutal and precise. Using a thermal lance, a tool that burns at temperatures high enough to cut through steel, they began to cut a hole in the wooden vault floor. The lance was terrifying, a jet of pure white-hot flame that hissed and spat, painting the cramped space in stark, hellish light. The smoke was acrid, choking, and they used a vacuum cleaner of all things, rigged with a hose, to suck the fumes back down into the tunnel, preventing them from seeping up into the bank and triggering smoke detectors. It was a macabre, almost comical image. Men engaged in a multi-million-pound heist, using a hoover to clean up the evidence of their break-in. The heat would have been intense, searing, the smell of burning wood and molten metal, but they worked with a cold, focused efficiency. They were so close. The prize was literally within their grasp. They cut a neat rectangular hole, just large enough for a man to drop through. They propped the cut section of the floor up carefully. It was a perfect trapdoor, hidden from the view of anyone standing in the vault. The night of September 11th was the culmination of all this work. The rain was a blessing, masking sound, keeping people indoors. The crew assembled for the final time. There was no jubilation, no celebration. The mood would have been grim, electric with a tension so thick you could taste it, like copper on the tongue. This was the point of no return. Everything up until now was preparation. Now they were committing the crime. One by one, they crawled through the tunnel, through the hole in the foundation, and into the cavity beneath the vault. Then they pushed up the cut section of the floor and emerged, like phantoms, into the heart of the bank's security. I want you to picture this scene. The vault is silent, lit only by the dim, emergency night lights. The air is still and cold, and these four men covered in grime and sweat are standing in a room designed to be impregnable. They had defeated the locks, the alarms, the concrete, the steel. They were surrounded by over 200 safe deposit boxes, and they had all night. They set to work with a chilling rhythm. This was their specialty. They used crowbars and drills to pry open the boxes. It wasn't a delicate operation. It was an act of violent liberation. The screech of tearing metal must have been horrific, but contained within the soundproofed vault, it was nothing. A secret scream in the night. They didn't know what was in each box. It was a brutal lottery. One box might contain nothing but old love letters and faded photographs. The next would disgorge a cascade of gold sovereigns, bundles of banknotes, diamond necklaces that glittered coldly in their headlamps' beams. They worked quickly, methodically, stuffing the valuable contents into large canvas bags. They ignored the personal, the sentimental. They were there for the liquid assets, the cold, hard currency of secrets and wealth. For hours this systematic plunder continued. The pile of ruined, empty boxes grew. Their bags grew heavy, swollen with an illicit fortune. They were trespassing in a place of absolute trust, and they were violating every single promise of security that had been made to the people who rented those boxes. They were not just stealing money, they were stealing peace of mind. And then a moment that must have frozen the blood in their veins. A faint, tinny voice, echoing from somewhere above them. It was coming from a radio one of them had left on in the tunnel to monitor police ban. A dispatcher's voice, calm and routine, reporting a suspected burglary at 8890 Baker Street. How could they have been discovered? The plan was perfect. They had been ghosts. Panic, cold and sharp, must have lanced through them. The frantic search for the source of the leak. And then they found it. An amateur radio enthusiast, a man sitting in his flat a few miles away, tuning his equipment, had accidentally picked up the signal from the two-way radios the gang was using to communicate between the vault and the lookout. He'd heard snippets of conversation. Hurry up. Almost done. And being a good citizen, had called the police. The police arrived. They circled the building. They tested the doors, shone their torches through the windows. They found nothing. The bank was sealed tight from the outside. It was a fortress. They had no reason to suspect that the burglary wasn't about to happen, but was in fact happening directly beneath their feet. They assumed it was a false alarm, a prank. They almost left. Down in the vault, the gang held their breath. They could hear the heavy footsteps of the bobbies on the pavement above, the muffled voices. They were trapped. To flee now would mean leaving the fortune behind, and likely being caught in the tunnel. To stay was to risk the police getting lucky, finding the leather shop, discovering their point of entry. It was Anthony's decision, a calculated, ice-cold gamble. He ordered them to continue, to stay silent, to work faster, but to continue. He bet everything on the fact that the police would see nothing amiss and leave. It was the most terrifying bet of his life. Minutes ticked by, an eternity in the silent, dust-filled vault, and then the footsteps receded. The police, satisfied it was a false alarm, drove away. The relief in that vault must have been a physical thing, a wave of nausea and dizzying euphoria. They had come within a hair's breadth of capture, and had been saved by the very perfection of their own crime. They worked with renewed frantic energy for another hour, clearing out the last of the valuable boxes. Their exit was as meticulous as their entrance. They lowered their heavy, precious bags down through the hole, passed them back along the tunnel. They carefully replaced the cut section of the vault floor, wiping away any obvious signs of their entry. They retreated back through the cavity, through the hole in the foundation, and back into the narrow claustrophobic tunnel, pulling the earth and rubble behind them to loosely seal the breach. They were erasing their own footsteps. By the time the sun rose over a damp, unsuspecting London,
They were gone. The leather shop was cleaned out, every trace of their presence removed. The tunnel entrance was sealed and covered. The van was miles away, the loot being divided in a secure, anonymous location. They had vanished back into the city's fog. The discovery, when it came on Monday morning, was one of pure, unadulterated shock. The bank manager, inserting his key, noticing nothing wrong, the door swinging open, the first step into the vault, and then the scene of devastation. The gutted boxes, their contents spilled and scattered, the air thick with the smell of violated security. The police were baffled. There were no forced doors, no tripped alarms, no signs of entry. It was as if the thieves had simply materialized inside the vault, done their work, and dematerialized. The press went wild. The walkie-talkie gang, they called them, the hole-in-the-ground gang. The sheer ingenuity of the crime captured the public's imagination. It was a classic English mystery, a real-life Sherlock Holmes tale, but with no Moriarty to be found. The police investigation was massive, but it went nowhere. The gang had been too careful, too professional. Most of the loot was never recovered. A few men were eventually caught, years later, on unrelated charges, and whispers connected them to Baker Street. Some money was found buried in a garden, a pittance compared to the total haul, but the mastermind, Anthony, was never officially identified, never caught. He and the bulk of the fortune simply disappeared, and so the story should end there, with an unsolved crime and a missing fortune. But the true legacy of the Baker Street robbery isn't in the money or the notoriety, it's in the silence that followed. It's in the unsettling question it leaves us with. We like to believe in walls, in locks, in alarms. We trust in concrete and steel. We deposit our treasures, our secrets, into these metal boxes, and sleep soundly, believing them to be safe. The Baker Street burglars didn't just steal jewels and cash, they stole that certainty. They proved that every fortress has a weakness, and that the most direct route isn't always through the door. Sometimes it's from below, from the dark, forgotten places that we never think to guard. I still walk down Baker Street sometimes, late at night when the rain is falling. I look at that building, now occupied by a different business, and I feel a chill that has nothing to do with the weather. I think about those men, crawling through the earth, their breath misting in the cold air, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and greed. I think about the police, standing right on top of them, completely unaware of the drama playing out just a few feet below their and the question that haunts me, the one that never quite goes away, isn't about how they did it. We know how they did it. The question is, where are they now? The quiet man next door, the grandfather smiling at his grandchildren, the unassuming retiree living abroad on a modest pension. Is he one of them? Is he living a life built on that one perfect, terrifying night? The city keeps its secrets. It always has. And the greatest secret of the Baker Street robbery was never the tunnel or the loot. It was the silence that followed, the perfect, unbroken, and deeply unsettling silence of the ghosts who got away.